Hello, everybody. Hello, YouTube. Welcome back. So happy to have you guys joining us once again. We'll give a couple minutes for everyone to trickle in here as we usually do. And while you're on your way in, I'd love to hear from you guys. In particular, I'd love to hear if you out there watching us right now are a practitioner, a salesperson that's out there going out and doing the job, doing the prospecting, doing the calling, the emails, the LinkedIn's, the whatever you're doing to go out and try and make contact and create opportunities. Because a lot of this is really going to be geared towards you. But of course, there's tons of strategic elements in there that are very important for leadership as well. But yeah, let us know in the YouTube chat if you are a sales practitioner. Would love to know. Cool. We'll give a couple minutes for those things to come in. Yeah, Colin.
Right on. I'm watching chat today. So if you're, if you got something to say, you got a question, you want some more clarity on something, just let me know. I've got it open here, and I'll do my best to make sure that we're addressing your questions. With that said, why don't we do some introductions? Sarah, do you want to go first?
Let's do it. My name is Sarah Hicks. I am the lead coach here at Predictable Revenue. You have seen me on this content since I was an SDR. So I really worked my way through the kind of tactical roles. Then I was an SDR manager. And now I'm teaching other companies how to do it internally, and very excited to be on a wonderful panel of these experts to chat through the second half of our sales development methodology with you. Over to Alice. Oh, mute.
Thank you.
There you go.
Hi, I'm Alice Hyman, take two. And I work with companies that have a B2B complex sale who need to generate leads and use SDRs to do so. And I'm very excited about helping them do that better. And thus, working with Predictable Revenue to share what we're going to share today about playbooks and how we can make SDRs successful so that our AEs are really happy because we're feeding them tons of leads.
Excellent. I guess that's over to me next. So Carrie White, and I am the Senior Vice President of Coaching and Delivery Services here with Predictable Revenue. I hail from a couple of decades worth of IBM years in sales leadership, sales training, sales coaching. I've led sales development teams. I was an SDR back when, and there's a whole host of great things ahead in store for you in this podcast as far as the tactics, how to execute, just how to be very mindful and focused on getting the most out of each engagement that you go out there to do. And hopefully you'll learn some wonderful tips, tricks, and hints from us, and looking forward to another great session.
Nice. And who's this guy?
Who's that guy?
This guy, I'm the janitor here at Predictable Revenue. Yeah. My name's Colin. I'm one of the founders, but done a little bit of everything. My experience comes from 10 years here at PR. And before that, I spent 10 years as an account executive closing everything. I mean, I've sold everything. Before that, I worked in retail, sold everything from cell phone contracts to kitchen cabinetry to high rises, diesel generators to mines and data centers, wheelchair lifts to hospitals, hotels, et cetera. And I'm sure I'm forgetting a bunch of things, but I primarily spent most of my life as a hunter closer, and then just kind of got bored of that and thought, hey, maybe I'll start a thing. And 10 years later, we're still here. Just what's up to Sarah? Good to have you, and Stas, good to see you again. And thanks for joining us today.
Nice. Very exciting. Well, Colin, why don't you give us a little bit of context on what we're doing today, kind of where this lives in the context of our sales development methodology?
Cool. So I'll bring it from the book to kind of where we're at today. And so with the book, it came out, roughly 10-ish years ago, because my math is not great. So it could be like 11, it could be 4. But I think the core idea from the book was there's 2 core ideas. One was salespeople shouldn't prospect, and therefore you should specialize your sales roles so that your AEs don't have to do that, and you'll get more out of them if they can just focus on closing, right? So it's the focus, it's the not shifting context. And then the kind of hidden methodology that was always there, but it wasn't really front and center, was the formula to PR was consistent top of funnel and consistent sales process equals predictable revenue. And while that was great, we wanted to really highlight that piece and bring it to the forefront. And as we were trying to do that, there were all these other kind of pieces that bubbled up from experience, because since the book was written, like Aaron wrote the book about his experience at Salesforce. which was obviously I don't know what the term is, unicorn, decacorn. It's a crazy fast growing company. They're massive now. Not sure if you've heard of them. And so much has changed and we've learned so much. And so our goal with the methodology was really to kind of to bring the two pieces together of like, here's the original methodology. And then here's what we've learned since. And one of the things that we've learned since is there's all these tactics. And initially that when the methodology took shape, it was just a bunch of tactics. It was like, okay, well, this is I hire, build a team, build a sequence, write an email, all that kind of stuff. And that's what we're going to focus on today. But what we also realized was that you kind of need some other like do not pass go, do not collect $200 kinds of things in the positioning and pace and practice. And positioning is like, your product, your offering, your position in the market, and pace is the amount of money that you're able to invest in your sales development team. And then practice is really that how well you're able to execute. So making sure you've got the right team and you're following the right playbook, et cetera, et cetera. And if you're interested in that piece, this is the wrong spot because we already covered that in a live stream a while ago. And Vero or Mero will link it in chat if you can. That would be awesome. So we'll throw that up. We'll also add it into the description in case you're watching this later. But today, what we're really going to drill in on is the tactics. So going from, everything from basically building your first list to closing that deal, following up on deals that haven't come through. This is where the magic happens, right? Like the first podcast was, or the first stream was, these are the core big ideas. Don't screw these up. Now this is like, okay, well, this is how, and this is what we've learned about how it works. Let me throw it back to you, Sarah. What did I miss?
No, you nailed it. So this is a real tactic side of things. So if we think about the last one, the principles is like the strategy that lives above all of this stuff. This is the playbook. This is the actual actionable path that you take to make all of those strategic things materialize into opportunities and deals in your pipeline. So we're going to walk you through, there's quite a few steps, as you can imagine. There's a lot of ground to cover in a playbook. So we're going to try to go through them with good, actionable detail, but also relatively quickly. Of course, we're going to continue to put out content on this stuff. And as always, if you've got questions, come to us via LinkedIn, via email. We'll be happy to have a chat and expand further on these things. But you can also read in great detail in our published new sales development methodology if you'd like to get some more background on where all of these things came from. But the very first thing that we start with, the first thing that we have to do to translate this strategy, especially the positioning, which is a big one, into real life is targeting. So targeting is the first thing you got to do. You're ready to actually start going out there and reaching out to people. So you got to figure out who you're going to reach out to and you got to go do it. So, Carrie, I'd love to hear from you, what you feel is kind of the strategic importance of this element of the playbook, first and foremost.
The strategic importance is high. It's, you got a matrix, right? How important is it? How valuable is it? It's a top right here. And I say this because we see clients that still come to us to want to outsource and say, hey, predictable revenue, why don't you, do our outbound for us? We don't want to do that. It's not our core business, but yet they don't necessarily know what the targeting is. And so you can't start to call outbound and do prospecting at all without understanding what your ideal customer profile is, what the key buyer personas are, what's important to them, right? What's the language and the vernacular that you might need to speak in and position your messaging in so that you are relevant and you are value add and purposeful for that audience and for those potential buyers. And so we see a lot of the big misses in organizations who might look to have other people do this. Maybe they take it on too quickly. Maybe they think that they can do it themselves. A lot of times they can't because they're not the experts. They don't know how to go outbound and properly target. And so it's huge. And it should take some good time and investment in terms of focused thought, in terms of competitive analysis and things like that. So again, it's the holy grail, in my opinion. It's the foundation of that house, and it's key.
What are your thoughts, Alice?
Well, I think what I see, the failure points are companies don't have their ideal customer really down pat, and then they use what they have to go buy a list. And then they take that list and maybe segment it a little bit, but then they have people start the outreach, the SDR start the outreach. And they have a low response rate. And now we're wondering, okay, is it the list? Is it the message? Is it the frequency? Like there's too many variables now. So if we don't start with a really tight ideal customer profile, which we still may end up amending later, but at least we say, this is who is ideal, not this is who is slightly ideal, or we would do business with them if we, if they call us kind of business, but these are absolutely the companies we want to do business with for these solid reasons. They fit these demographics, they fit these psychographics as far as we can tell with the research we've done. Then we buy the list, right? And then do some segmentation, based on whatever other criteria and the people that we're trying to reach. Then when we write really good messaging and send it, we know we can rule that out. It's not the list. Now, maybe the message isn't hitting, and we're going to talk some more about these other things later, or there's something else our SDRs are not executing properly, but we've ruled out that it's the list. And just too many times I go back and I'm like, it's the list. So it doesn't matter what you do because it's the list. And that's because you don't have your ideal customer down. So I can't say it enough times. You've got to start there. You've got to have a really good list before you start.
Yeah, absolutely. Colin, what's your experience on this?
I mean, can I just say exactly what the two of them said?
But then,
because I'm a man, I'll explain it again. Exactly what they said.
All right, let's keep the mansplaining out of it, Colin.
Yeah.
No.
The only thing I would add is just because I totally agree with them on what Carrie and Alice have said. I think the only thing I would add is if you aren't confident in your targeting, the campaigns, the messaging, your approach to that market should vary. So if you're very confident and you have conclusive evidence and proof that I've closed 1,000 of these, then you can be a little bit more assumptive with your messaging. Hey, I know you're, if I'm reaching out to VP sales, like, hey, I know you're, probably dealing with quotas, and hey, this time of year, you're probably dealing with your year end, et cetera, et cetera. I know a lot about this persona and I know they're a great fit for what we do. So I can make some assumptions and I can build that into my messaging, into my playbook. But if I don't have those things, then I probably want to take it a little bit more of a softer ask. Hey, is this relevant to you? That kind of thing. And I know we're talking about targeting, but I just thought like, this is the one thing that I think a lot of people screw up when we're thinking about targeting is just when you're thinking about building that list, how confident are you that this is the absolute right list? And if you're not confident, then this is going to inform your messaging strategy, which we'll get to in a minute. And if you are confident, well, then you go the other direction.
And even then, I always recommend some A/B testing because even when you're highly confident, why not test two different routes? Why not test two different sets of messaging that go down different paths to see which one will pull more, right? Now I know we'll get to more of that, but.
Yeah, absolutely. So just from a kind of tactical perspective, I've got a bunch of questions that if you're sitting at this position, you're building from scratch, you're sitting in this place where you're trying to determine the targeting in the playbook. I'm going to give you some questions that you need to ask about everything so that you can plan this stuff. So first and foremost, as everyone has mentioned here, what is your ideal customer profile? What criteria do companies need to meet in order to be in that ideal customer profile? That's headcount, revenue, tools they're using, any other way you slice and dice it, but really understand what those criteria are that make the target you want to reach out to. Then who's the buyer persona? What is their title, seniority level, department? Beyond your economic buyer, who else might you prospect to try and get into this account and have these conversations? Who makes up the buying committee? Who might influence your economic buyer? Who might be a detractor? Who could be a champion? Who's the end user? And then segmentation. As Alice said, you're probably going to have quite a few different companies and buyer personas that exist in this ideal customer profile. So how do you segment that into the smallest possible groups of like-minded individuals so that you can target them with a one-to-many approach that feels like a one-to-one approach? It feels relevant, timely, specific. And then with each of those segments, what are their jobs to be done? What are the use cases with what you can help them with? What are their pain points? What are their goals? What are they measured on? What are their aspirations? And what differentiates all that stuff from one segment to another? Then when we get into the tactics of actually going and purchasing and building lists, where can you reliably and affordably source contact information for these prospects? It's not going to be the same one company to another. You can get a huge data provider like ZoomInfo who's got an absolute plethora of information and they don't have it on your ICP. So you've got to find the specific place that makes the most sense for you. Is it going to be directories, websites? Is it available for purchase through data providers? Or do you need to have a person do it, either outsourced or in-house to do that scraping? And finally, what information do you need to have on each prospect so that you can reach out? Is that phone number, email address, LinkedIn URL, those types of things? So that is a lot to chew on. That is a lot of stuff. You probably pause, rewind, and watch that bit back. But these are the things that you need to ask yourself to go out and actually effectively target based on all of the elements that we've spoken about so far.
And if you rewatch this, just like look at my face as every time Sarah was like, and this and this. And I'm like, yeah. There's like so much. Yeah.
I will say that, so some customers just, know, and they can get through this process relatively quickly on their own, and others don't. So if you're out there and you're thinking, my gosh, this is a lot, and I don't even know where to begin, and I'm not really sure, then again, that's why companies can come to companies like Predictable Revenue, right? So we're here to help you. We have that experience. But where you do, whether you go out and have somebody help you or whether you do it on your own, if you do know and you can get through these steps and really execute on these actions, it's tight and it's fast. And we've seen it as well with some of the companies that we're working with, where they have this and where we work really well with them and we can get them to and through these steps. It is phenomenal. The return on investment, the scale, the speed, and everything that they can reach because they've done this really, really effectively at the start.
Yeah.
Can I give
absolutely.
a tip on how to start? If you are a mature company, if you're a startup and you have no customers yet, this doesn't count. Do you have time for me to do that?
Quick one.
Quickly?
Quick one. Yeah. Go for it.
So if you have an existing customer base, rank them and rate them. Put all the companies down there, rank and rate. Then look at the top 20, top 10, top 100, choose, right? And then look to see what they have in common and look who you talk to at those companies to close the deal. And that will inform you on what you want more of, right? So once you rank and rate them, you'll just pick your top ones and say, gosh, if we had more customers like these, it'd be phenomenal. Then see what they have in common and see who the people were that you had to meet at those companies before you close those deals. And that will help you on your way to perfecting your ideal customer profile.
And can I build on what Alice said? Because I love that. And the one step further that I would probably take it, depending on the context of where you came from in the organization, if you're brand new as a fresh sales development manager, sales development rep, and you're trying to write metric or trying to write messaging for this persona, get them on the phone and talk to them.
Yes.
Jump on AE calls and like that you can't write messaging for people that you don't understand, right? The whole thing, I think it's been said earlier, is like, it's about resonating. It's about empathy. And you can't have that unless you know who these people are and you've had conversations with them.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Okay. Next element of our playbook, another one of these foundational things that is like, before you even get started, you need this thing, is tools. You need a basic tool stack to get you started. And Colin, I'd love to hear from you first on just kind of just thoughts on the importance of the tool stack.
I mean, I get told I'm a tool all the time, so people must really need me.
Okay, that's for another conversation.
I think the basics are your CRM and your sales engagement tool. And I think, and it's really important to point out, like, you don't have to go with Salesforce. It does make certain things a lot easier. And I think this is one of those cases where I'd almost pick the sales. If I'm a sales development leader, you probably aren't going to have too much influence over the CRM system. But unpopular opinion, I don't think you need Salesforce to run outreach or SalesLoft, right? Like, I believe it's possible with or without. It certainly is a little bit better if you run them together. And Sarah's like, what are you saying? Don't do this. But like, don't get stuck with a mediocre tool that your entire team's workflow is bottlenecked on. Because if you use some obscure CRM, if you're on Microsoft Navision or Dynamics Navision from 1998, and they're like, okay, you got a prospect in a sheet, like, just get a tool that's going to work great for your SDRs, and then make sure it fits and works with all the other tools. But I think the first thing that you probably want to optimize for is the thing that people are going to be doing every single day. And that's the sales engagement tool. So like get a good one and then worry about making it work later.
Alice,
So
what
I'm
have
sure
you seen
people
on
are
this?
thinking what tools fall in that category. So without, favoriting anybody, can you name a few?
Oh, carb.io was obviously the best, but that's, we blew that up. That was my fault. The common ones that I see most often are Sales Loft and Outreach. They're the most
Engagement
robust.
tools.
Groove is another one that I see works fairly well also.
Heard about vanilla
Vanilla
soft?
Soft.
Yeah, vanilla soft. When I did a little bit of like research and RevOps research into kind of the top ones, and there are about 5 that live on that list, and obviously all cycle through their spots. Sales Often Outreach generally taking the top 2 spots, but then things like Groove, Vanilla Soft, maybe a couple of other ones are kind of filtering in and out of that list.
Cool.
Any thoughts, though, Alice, more on kind of the importance of a great tool stack and automation, all that stuff?
Well, I think a great tool stack is essential. However, what I see is too many tools and there's no user adoption for those tools. So if you are going to have SDRs using tools, then make sure you choose wisely and you train, and set expectations for them to actually use it. Your user adoption really needs to be 100% for your SDRs if you purchased a tool. If it's not, then you've got a problem, because that means you've got some SDRs who are not using that tool. So what are they doing? So we have to be efficient. So we need to pick the tools really carefully. Then we need to train on it and have expectations and have the user adoption that goes with the tool, or the tool is useless. So don't over tool either, because I've seen it where, this sales reps are like, I don't know what to have open on my screen. You go back and forth between this one. They don't integrate. It's too hard. So be very careful to choose a CRM or if whatever CRM you already have, choose a tool that integrates with it. That would be the best. And then really train everyone on how to not just use it, but be efficient using it, so it doesn't seem overwhelming to them. And then you have high user adoption.
Nice. Carrie, what do you think?
Agreed. The key thing that I would say in all of this is the adoption piece and the ability to push back on whoever provider that you end up deciding. There is typically support. A lot of companies try to figure it out on their own. Again, leverage the support and leverage the executive or the person that they assign you. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. And I would also further identify a subject matter expert that you could have as your go-to tool person that is there to help to, again, educate and drive up adoption and kind of be that green belt, if you will, across the organization. Because without it, to Alice's point, it's useless and you're not getting the value out of the tool and the money that you spent in it. There's a whole lot of things that you can do, though, to get started, and questions I know that are key. I certainly didn't realize how absolutely foundational the understanding of email authentication and deliverability is. Even though I ran lead development and sales development teams, I didn't really get the back end part, and it's just gotten worse. And so there's a whole host of ways to navigate around that, and domains that need to be set up and warmed up and whatnot. So a tool stack has to really help you to also make sure that the emails that you're sending are actually getting delivered, so that your prospectors can actually get in contact with those contacts without having be in spam, without finding yourself on the blacklist, let alone getting efficient with dialers and some conversation analytics tools and intent data, which is great, by the way, and workflow automation and sentiment analysis. There's a whole host of things that I think are really key that fit in that tool stack section.
The way I like to think about it in terms of what tools you need is it's very much a microcosm of the jobs to be done theory, where like you purchase a tool to do a job that you need to do. That is all these things are doing, is like, do I need to send emails? I need a domain and a thing that lets me send emails. Do I need to make phone calls? I need a dialer. Do I need to manage my relationship with customers? I need a CRM. So it's quite simple to understand the types of tools you need here. But then, of course, there's a massive selection to choose from, and that gets quite difficult. So, like Carrie mentioned, there are a bunch of things that we think are kind of like table stakes. And then there are things that are great as you start to scale that are going to make things easier. Those table stakes things are like email domains, which means you need an alias prospecting domain. If you don't know what that is, look it up. You need it. I don't care what you say to me. You need it. You're not special. The spam's coming for you too. So you need an email domain, you need a dialer, you need a CRM, and you need a sales engagement tool. And that tool is what is automating the outreach that you're doing. The things that you can add on top of that as you start to grow are the parallel assisted dialers, which are the things that dial quickly, the conversation analytics tools that listen to your calls and give you insights, the intent data, which tells you, trigger buying, trigger information that's happening out there, sentiment analysis, all these things. But table stakes, there's just those few elements you need right away to get started. And to figure out which of those you need out of all the ample choice you've got, budget obviously is huge. We're never going to say spend tens of thousands of dollars right away if you don't have it. Maybe you do buy a CRM and a sales engagement tool in one at first, like a HubSpot. I know what Colin's saying about like, don't make your people struggle through something that's not going to work. But at the same time, Salesforce, you need someone who understands Salesforce. You're going to need a RevOps person. Like there's a whole bunch of costs that go into the more complicated ones, although they can perform better and give you better analysis. So think about budget, think about those jobs that need to get done, and find the tool that does that best within your budget. Think about where your prospects spend their time online and how they like to be prospected, because that's where you want to be, and you need a tool that helps you be there. And if you need to meet a certain revenue goal and you're looking at like, okay, I've got a huge total addressable market, tiny deal size, huge revenue target, probably going to need to leverage a little bit more automation. On the flip side, low TAM, huge average deal size, still huge revenue target, you're going to need to go a little more manual and customized. So what tool helps you do that? Those are the questions you need to ask to figure out what tool to go in your tool stack. And you're going to need a bunch of tools. So next, prospecting. This is where we're diving into some of this stuff around the messaging and all those types of things. So prospecting encompasses a few things. It is all of the outreach. When we say prospect, we just mean the outreach that's going out to your prospects. So Carrie, tell us about the importance of this one.
Very important for sure. This is definitely taking into account all of the things that we talked about in the targeting piece, and then blending them obviously with some of the automation and insights that we just talked about from the tools piece, and almost putting it all together into then that strategy again of what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, how long each of the outreaches will last. And depending on, again, your target and your ICP, you might be able to have 2 attempts, 2 calls, 2 emails, 2 what have you, and you get them on the phone, or you get them on through email, and others it might take you 12 or 20. And so sequences and detailing some of the types of touches and the variances of those touches. And so it's definitely very important, and for sure in terms of the strategy of how you'll prospect, again, based on what we've talked about. But it's going to include a lot of the data as well, in terms of leveraging insights that you can draw to them through value added prospecting is kind of what I call it. So knowing what some of the potential objections are that they're going to have is going to better help prepare you to outreach and prospect in a way that actually might negate some of those, take them off the table. So there's a whole host of things obviously in prospecting that are really, really important. And those are just a few on the top of my mind.
And Colin, as a guy who built a company that does prospecting, what's your take on old prospecting here?
Not much. I don't know. Don't really know anything. Yeah. I mean, you called out so many great examples about like, are we going wide? Are we going tall with our strategy? And I think the only piece I would add to what you said there is just, this starts with, I'll bring us back to the core principles, which the first or the second one is pace, which is how fast is your company moving? How much, like, have you raised a series A, a series B, a seed? Are you bootstrapped? That's going to determine your revenue goals, likely, right? It's going to determine how much you can spend. But when you get into this, when you're in the sort of the strategic side of things, these decisions are likely already made if you're a sales development rep or sales development manager. So what you need to understand are, what's the financial background? What is the sales math, right? Like, what does that look like? How big is the target, the market that we're going after? And what kind of metrics do we need to hit in order to hit our weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual goals? This is very easy to do in a spreadsheet. The most important piece is, before you get into this, is just do that in a spreadsheet and then come back to it and gut check. Because the strategy of, like, the financial strategy, the cost to acquire a customer that you need to hit is going to dictate the sales development styles, whether it's tall or wide, that you can afford to invest.
Yeah.
And so I would just kind of pull us back. Like, I know you all know, like, tactics really, really well. And so I just thought I'd take a step back, highlight some things, because Sarah already said this. I just wanted to, like, double highlight it, that, like, this is super important. If you're selling to the Fortune 100 and you find yourself with a list of 30,000 names and an email gun, and you're just about ready to start cranking, like, pause, you're doing it wrong. So that's the only thing I wanted to highlight, is just, it needs to be calibrated. The messaging, the sequence design needs to be calibrated to that target market and to your strategy and, like, what you can afford to invest.
Totally. Alice, what do you think?
Well, most of the companies that I work with, and conversely, most of the emails that I receive that are prospecting emails, show me that most people are ill prepared to be writing and sending emails. So everything, that Colin and Carrie said, plus prepare. So before you start writing messages, you have a lot of work to do. And a lot of that work comes with your ideal customer. It's going to inform you on a lot of things. So if I'm going to write a series of 8 to 12 email messages, I need to have really solid information about what's happening in the industry. What are some startling statistics or facts or things that are intriguing and are going to draw people in? So I need my curiosity catchers, right? I need those ready to go. I need a lot of them. I can repeat some of them, but I probably need 3, 4, or 5 of them if I'm going to do a series of 8 to 12 emails. I need to know the people in that industry that I'm talking to, so I know how to talk to them, how to approach them. Is it a more friendly approach, a more serious approach, a more formal approach? So I need all of that figured out before I start actually crafting the message. And then once I start crafting the message, right, if I've got a string of 8 or 12, there has to be some sort of thread that weaves between them. So I always say, you've got to think like a Netflix producer, right? It's got to be binge-worthy content. I didn't answer this guy or gal's, this SDR's email. I didn't answer it, but it was interesting and intriguing. I'm just too busy right now. I get the next one and it intrigues me a little bit more. By the 3rd, 4th, or 5th, maybe, the 6th or 8th one, I'm like, I'm still reading. So now I might be ready to actually respond. And I've got to keep hooking them to the next. It's just like you're binging on a Netflix or an HBO Max show or whatever, and you can't wait to watch the next one, and you watch 3 or 4 in a row. So if we think like that before we start writing our messaging, we're going to have messages that get people's attention, and we're going to have a much higher reply rate. So we have to do our homework first, or we won't be able to write those kinds of messages. And by the way, those messages don't start with, "Hi, I'm Alice. I'm super great, and so is my company," because that's a delete, right? So you've got to have a hook that is, I know this about people like you and your industry, and they need a solution. It's got to start with something like that, and then drive them into it, pull them into it so they want to read more.
And it's okay if the first version of the email that you write starts with that. That's very common. Every email I've written starts with, like, "Hi, I'm Colin and I'm great and my company is great. And here's the value." And then I'm like, oh, okay, I've got the good part. Now I just delete the top
Delete
part.
the
So
front.
don't feel bad if you're like,
Right.
oh, every email I write. That's the same for us too. We just go back and delete it. And then I sent it to Sarah and she's like, you're an idiot. I would never send this out to a client.
Yeah. Don't hit send on the first one.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
takes work to edit these and get them really good.
Totally. Gen Z asked us a question earlier, sort of about sequences and kind of stats. And so they're looking for like a leading metric. So can we talk about the sort of pipeline creation rate? And my assumption here is that we're talking about the percentage of contacts that enter pipeline, percentage of people that go from cold to entered pipeline. So we put them on a list, and from being on the list, what percentage of them will, let's say, book a meeting or hold a meeting? So we booked a meeting, the meeting held, and whatever criteria you use for your meetings, let's say it's entered pipeline. So thoughts on benchmarks? I've got a number in my head, but I'm curious to see what other people think.
I'm going to pass this one to Sarah because she's looking and digging into this all the time with a number of our customers. And I think it's dependent on the customer in a lot of ways, or your prospect that you're working with in a lot of ways. It's dependent upon so many factors, but I think averages, I'll defer to Sarah. She knows.
Yeah. What do you think, Sarah? Like 70, 80, 90%?
100. Like if it's not 100, I don't know what you're doing wrong.
If Sarah's writing your campaigns, of course.
Yeah.
No, I agree with Carrie. I think it varies very widely. And it's also very difficult to assign yourself a benchmark. If, like Alice was saying a little bit earlier, it's different if you're doing this for the first time versus if you've done this for a while. Like then you've got your own benchmarks that you can benchmark against and continue to improve. If you're starting from scratch, there is no point in trying to reach some arbitrary other companies or industry benchmark because you just simply don't know yet where the bottleneck is. You don't know because there's all these steps along that whole pipeline from top of funnel to close that each can have incremental improvements. And so to say like one metric needs to be something and then will be good is not really ever going to happen. Like you need to have perfected everything leading up to that point. And then you can maybe say, okay, we know, but it takes such a long time to figure those things out. I think the most important thing is to have your, each of your outreach, each of your channels, you can kind of look at the industry benchmarks that exist there and say like, okay, if our emails are not converting at this or higher. So for instance, we say as like absolute baseline, the very first email campaign you ever write, 25% open rate. If it's below that, throw it out. Like, but this is really like starting from scratch because you're starting just whatever. Each time you get a new benchmark that's better than that, that's your new benchmark. And you're not allowed to go below that. And you keep going until you hit ideally aspirationally around 70. You're hovering around 70 for your open rates. Ideally, you're hovering around 20, 15, 25 if you're lucky for your open rates. But it's like, you got to start there. And then how do you convert on the show rate from booking the conversation to showing on the demo? And then how do you increase conversion rate from demo to what are all the other pipeline steps that exist? And finally to close. I don't have a hard benchmark that I could throw your way and say, aim for that, to be honest.
Yeah. And I could give you a number, but you're going to be comparing it to, the number comes from nobody, right? Because it's an average. By definition, nobody has this number. I mean, it's very unlikely that somebody has this exact number. And also, like I've been looking at thousands of sequences and looking at the data. They're all different. And the context of the sequence is very, very different. The context of meeting, of like how our clients handle meeting acceptance, is very different, right? Some just want them to show up. Some just want them to be introduced over email and then the AE takes it over. Some, if it doesn't meet these exact criteria, then it gets kicked back to the SDR. SDR is going to go find somebody else. These will all change your entry point into pipeline, and they will all change how it progresses later on. And it sort of depends on who. I think Jen was adding some clarification that they were looking for qualified lead pipeline. So maybe the assumption here is like once they've entered pipeline, and that's really maybe something Alice maybe can comment on.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I'm always looking for is conversations, right? So whatever effort you put in, how many conversations came out. So that's the ultimate measure, right? And of course you want more sales, but to know if what your SDRs is doing is working is conversations. And then next it's the quality of that conversation are they a fit, right? And then do they convert? Of those that are a fit, do they convert? But for the SDRs, we want them booking quality conversations. So whatever a quality conversation looks like. So I had a client where they booked tons of demos. The guy was just a crazy good demo booker, the SDR. The problem is after the demo, like less than 1% went to the next step. So what was the problem there, right? Got to go back and diagnose. So he somehow strong-armed, cajoled, tricked people into, I don't know, having a demo. They were maybe not the decision makers. They were maybe really not ideal customers because very, very small, like less than 1% went to the next step. So be really careful about what you're measuring and what benchmarks you're putting up, because that's SDR made a ton of money because he was compensated on booking demos, and he did. So I guess, it's cautionary tale.
Yeah. And Jen out there, Gen Z or Gen Z, depending on where you're dialing in from. I'm Canadian, so I'm going to say Z, but I think that's part of the reason that we, so far at PR, we're not providing kind of benchmarks in a way out there. There's other companies that do. And so there are some rules out there around, leads to opportunity conversion rate. I think OpenView benchmarks at about 12%. We've got other companies that reveal it's about their CXO reach rate is improved, of course, with more calls, but some of the outbound prospecting, again, when the messaging is refined, when you really know your ICP, when you're good with your targeting and you're leveraging the right tools, you can actually increase that like 20% almost year over year as you grow that. And generally average dials a day, again, because you are trying to put in some thoughts, and yes, you can prepare an aggregate, but you still need to hit those phones, make those dials, send those emails. Around 56 is usually the kind of average dial per day. But I think, lead to opportunity, 12%. And we also see standards of folks when they get to opportunity to close. If you have a really great close rate, 20% is a massively great close rate. But you don't tend to see much higher than that.
Love that.
Yeah. I think.
Go ahead.
I was just going to try to bring her home and move on to the next one. So if you got something else.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I think we get a sales development math worksheet as part of the methodology that is coming out or out somewhere. I haven't seen it, so I don't know. It may be linked somewhere, but if it's not, drop me an email and I'll share a sheet with you. But it basically had some of the steps that Carrie mentioned there.
Nice.
And you can put your variables in and see how you see what it outputs to future revenue creation. Back to you, Sarah.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. So a little quick run through this checklist of questions that you need to ask yourself about the prospecting to make sure that you're setting it all up correctly from the beginning. What channels are you using to reach out to your prospects? What type of language do your prospects use? Are they technically inclined, creative, analytical? And how is that going to inform the way you reach out? What research have you done on industries, markets, companies, personas, their competitors? And how can all of that inform your outreach? What benchmarks are you trying to surpass within your outreach? So this is your own minimum open rate, reply rate, conversion rate, et cetera. And you're going to benchmark off yourself and you're going to continually improve. And finally, the most important thing, because we never nail it on the first try, is what is your best practice for experimentation? Who is in charge of experimentation? How do you make sure that the data is clean and the learnings are captured? How do you document your learnings? Who documents it? How do you disseminate that learning among the rest of the team? And what are other prospectors who are prospecting into your space doing that works? Because we can learn so much from other people who are out there doing the same thing as us. But the next, I think penultimate, I want to say, yes, penultimate aspect of our playbook is qualification. And Alice, I'd like to go to you first for this one, because obviously it ties in really heavily with all the stuff we've been talking about with targeting, with reaching out to people, with the list being wrong, with the messaging being wrong. So tell me about, the best way to kind of qualify and set those qualification criteria and make sure that what's entering pipeline is great.
So I think this is going to be specific to each company. And the reason I say that is there used to be some old methodology, or, some traditional methodology that said, this is how you qualify. They use things like BANT. Do you have the budget, authority, need, and what's the timeline? BANT, right? BANT. So today, I feel like those qualification criteria are old. When we get someone on the phone who is interested, so they've answered the email, they've scheduled a call, or they're going back and forth on email or LinkedIn or wherever, but they've shown interest and they do want to talk to somebody. How do we make sure the AE gets a qualified candidate to talk to, right? So the first thing you have to think about is this, do you have a complex sale or not? If you do have a complex sale, then just talking to one person, which is likely to happen on the first encounter, it's hard to qualify because you've got to know who the other buying influences are and how they're going to interact with it. So most of what you should do to qualify on that call and make sure this is a person that's going to be worth your AE talking to is, what role do they play in the decision, and who else would they have to bring in, and who else will be involved? If they know the answers to those things, then it's probably qualified to move on, right? We don't need to know if they have a budget, because most companies today wouldn't be talking to you if they didn't have a budget and or weren't considering building a budget for it. But a lot of the reason they've reached out to you in the first place, or answered, replied to you, is because they need to know how much it costs so they can build a budget. So that's why I say budget's sort of out now, because companies who want what you have will figure out how to get a budget. But if the right people are involved in the decision, it won't be a problem. And if they're not, it will be a problem. And then authority wise, the first person that answers or replies is probably somebody doing the research or been tasked with figuring out some stuff. So they're not going to have the authority to make a decision. So you're going to have to figure out, again, what role do they play? Now, if it's a business to consumer or a less complex sale, that one person might have all the information you need to know whether they are a good fit to talk to your AEs and figure out, what the next steps are. So it really depends on how complex your sale is, what the qualification specifically should be. But you need to have those qualifying criteria written down and trained on so that the right questions can be asked. We don't waste people's time. We can quickly know whether they should or shouldn't have a meeting with our account executive.
Carrie, thoughts?
It's interesting. I mentioned earlier, I kind of grew up in IBM and then left. I don't think I mentioned I left for a few startups, but for me, BANT has been ingrained in me, and that's my thing. And I would agree with everything Alice said. The only difference is budget. It can be a question around, help me understand your budgeting process. Like, how does that work? Again, but as an SDR,
Yes.
you're not going to be having the time or the inclination to get into that depth. That's more, again, high level. If you can get that to your AEs, they'll love you. They'll absolutely love you, right? If you can understand the budgeting process, how does that work? If and when and should, this be something that you want to go forward with? Authority, what's the decision-making process? It's more questioning around the process and how that works at their company. Again, it depends on the size. There could be boards, there could be procurement processes if you're talking big customers, or it could be, it's me, myself, and I. And there's so many different qualification systems or methodologies out there: spin selling, neat selling, snap selling, challenger selling, medic, you name it. You got to figure out what works, obviously, for you and for your team. Whether you use BANT, whether you use neat, whether you use spin, they're all pretty much, boil it down, it's the same, right? It's what's the need, what's driving this need, what are the impactful, tangible and sometimes intangible business results that you are trying to achieve. Why now? Why not later? Why not yesterday? Like, those types of questions are all really key in terms of qualifying whether or not only is the customer or the prospect rather a fit, let alone are they a fit now, right? Or can you also potentially even increase emergency?
I'll just say this. I want to be careful that we don't qualify people out that shouldn't be, because they don't. That's the problem I have with band. It qualifies too many people out that we probably should have talked to. And so I agree with you that it's just a matter of the way you ask questions. Instead of, do you have a budget? Yes or no. And if the answer is no, you're not qualified.
No.
Have you established a budget yet? Oh, okay, that's fine. I just need to know that to help the AE understand where you are in your decision making. That's
And
it,
when, yeah, absolutely.
easy peasy, but you
yeah.
need to teach people how to ask it a different way so that
Totally.
you don't screen too many people out of the process.
Agreed, wholeheartedly.
Colin?
I mean, yes, music to my ears. The one thing that drives me insane is when I hear somebody say, doesn't matter who, that there's no project in the next 90 days, so I don't want to talk to them. If you're an AE and you've said that before and we meet at a bar, coming after you, like, it's infuriating. It's like, this is your job. I've handed you somebody who's interested, somebody who's a fit. And I think the misconception there is, and the place where I most commonly hear this is AEs or sales teams that are accustomed to inbound.
Yes.
And they're like, well, this outbound feels awful because there's no motivation. You have to build that motivation. You have to build that excitement. And so
you
I
have
think
to build a relationship, Colin. So here's the thing that just drives me nuts. And I've been talking about this on LinkedIn lately with a number of people and on some of the other podcasts and programs that I've been on. It's a long game when you have a complex sale. It's a long game when you have a business to consumer sale. It's a long game, no matter how you look at it, because even if you already bought what I have, let's say it's a car, you already bought a car. That car doesn't last forever. You're going to buy another car. So if you bought that car from somebody else, but I develop a great relationship with you, then next time you buy a car, you're going to buy it from me. And it might even make you buy a car sooner because you want to do business with me and my company, because I've built our brand up in your eyes and I've intrigued you and I've stayed with you and I've shown you the value, right? So in a complex sale, it's even longer. Like, you need refrigeration units for some big building, right? But you already have them and they're not broken. But when they break, I want to be there. Or when you need to replace them, or when you build a new building, I want to be there. So it's a long game. And we just put so much pressure on quota that salespeople don't even have time to play this long game that they need to play. So you're talking about SDRs serving up what could be a fabulous relationship that isn't going to buy in the next 90 days. And we go, So you got to be careful what you wish for, right? You've got to make sure that you're really in line with the vision and strategy of your company. And if you want customers for life versus just a customer for now, you have to change your thinking around it. And you have to teach people, okay, this person isn't going to buy from me in the next 90 days. Then what? What do I do if this is somebody I really want to do business with and I want to continue that relationship and meet the other people and be there when they are ready? What does that look like versus the people who are ready to buy in 90 days? And I have to split my attention a little bit, but I have to nurture both.
Love it. I think the most valuable question that you could ask a revenue leader, or the most valuable thing that that a revenue leader could ask for, is a list of people that are interested and are in the right roles at the right companies. And that's what these, like, don't have a project or don't have budget are. And they get thrown away. And that just, like, you can tell it eats at us. I know we got to move, keep going. So the only other things I'll add here is make sure you decide ahead of time. Don't, like, get a bunch of meetings booked and then, oh no, these are awful or these are good, right? Start loose, then tighten it up a little bit as you learn more.
Right.
And then if you're an SDR, don't go too deep. And if you are an SDR and you're going too deep, it's okay. But, like, you got to learn when the right place to hand it off is. The handoff is an art form. It's very, very common for SDRs to want to hang on to it and get all the way. And, like, I've seen conversations with prospects and they're talking to the AE and they're like, hey, we talked to, so-and-so about this already. They've lost all that momentum because they've had a good conversation with the SDR and the SDR took it too far, deep in the conversation. And now they have to repeat back everything that they already told the SDR to the AE. Right. And that kills momentum. And then they're like, well, why did so-and-so pass me after you? If you're just going to ask me the same questions, why couldn't they have just handled this? So just remember that the role that you're in is a support role to go from point A to point B and learn how to make a really great, beautiful handoff. So the momentum stays with the prospect and gets transferred to your AE.
Nice.
Beautiful lead-in.
Speed round checklist. What are the baseline criteria that a prospect must meet before they are considered an opportunity? So it's within ICP, right buyer personas, anything else you need. What do you need to know about the company they work for, the use cases or projects, the technology that you're going to have to integrate with, pain points, priorities, that kind of stuff. How do you create a are we a fit call script that helps you naturally uncover the answers to those questions? And then with your qualification call and the handoff, how do you reduce no-show rate? How do you increase opportunity quality? If an opportunity falls just outside of the usual qualification criteria, but they might still be a good opportunity, who makes that final call and how do you make that decision? Next and final element of the playbook is follow through, not follow up, follow through. And Colin, I know this is one of your faves, so you tell us about it.
I mean, we were just ranting about it for 5 minutes. It's exactly, it blends in with those pieces. It's making sure that you're doing the right things with the right meetings. And so this is where the AE and the SDR role overlap, and you really need to define, here's the swim lanes and here's how we're going to handle all the different scenarios. Because the worst thing that can happen is you've got somebody on the line, or not on the line literally, but like they've responded, they're the right person at the right company, and then they just slip through the cracks because they weren't ready, or they ghosted a call, or they had a chat with an AE and the AE is thinking, okay, well, there's no project in 90 days, or they didn't meet these qualification criteria. So what happens? There's so much value that's won, but mostly lost in this step that it's insane. Like, this is, all the other ones are important, but if you screw this one up, all of that value is gone. This is one of those biggest hidden leaks that you can find in your pipeline that I don't think people talk enough about. So just making sure you map out all the potential outcomes, you understand whose job it is who owns the relationship with this individual. And then if it sits in the AE's pipeline for 60 days and then nothing happens, well, and they don't send a follow-up, they don't do any work to reactivate, what happens? Can the SDR go grab them and book another meeting with them?
Right.
So,
Harry, what do you think?
Yeah, it's this one is my I don't know, nemesis. I hate, like, if people that don't follow through, follow up, close the loop, whatever the heck you want to call it. This one boils my blood. To me, it's so, you get so far if you do all these things, right? You work this hard, you send the messaging, you've got the targeting done, you've done your tool stack, you're putting your notes even in the tool stack, you're creating an opportunity to have a more seamless handoff because you don't have to ideally repeat what you just went through with the customer as you hand it off to the AE, because you're leveraging a great tool stack and platform, and you've actually done that and you followed through by putting it in the system. But then beyond that, there's no follow-up. And so identifying the who is following up, when they're following up, how often they're going to follow up, what that process looks like. It's almost like designing yourself an alliance with your peer across the table, right? Your account executive. And there has to be some semblance of operational process that needs to be either identified by the two of you, or ideally dictated to you in some cases from the top, the operations team, to say, this is how we're going to do it, because we don't want anything to fall through the cracks, because it takes so much time and effort to then just go into the ether.
Alice, what have you seen here?
So my ask of all sales reps is basically to follow through, meaning continue to try and intrigue them until they either tell you to stop or they move forward to the next step. So your job is not done, so if the SDR hands this off to you, and the follow through has got to be there. And if it's not, you need a system. So you, as the leader, you've got to catch the stuff, that nobody follows through on, and figure out what happens. So if I, the AE, don't want to follow through, I need a place to put that and say, this is not something I'm interested in working on. Where do I put this? Does it go back to marketing? Does it go back to an SDR? Where does it go? So that needs to be clearly mapped. But once that smooth, amazing handoff, based on our conversation, I'm so excited to introduce you to Ben, our AE, and I'm sure you guys are going to have a great conversation. follow through with that, with your, video saying, hey, I'm really glad you two got hooked up and you have an appointment. Here, here's the agenda, or whoever's going to send that message, the SDR, the AE, some sort of, brilliant handoff. So the prospect is ecstatic and, can't wait to talk to the AE, right? Dream world, Alice. But I'm just saying, do your best, right? And then the AE has to follow through. What is that? It should be mapped. You do A, and then you do B, and then you C, and then you do D, and then you do E. And if you're done with it by then, you've got to put it back to marketing, or it goes back to the SDR or whatever, but it needs to be clearly mapped. So I, as the AE, know what my responsibility is, and I do it until I take it, either they respond to me, they tell me, take me off your list, I don't want to hear from you ever again, or I don't want to work it anymore. And it goes back to where? Marketing, SDR, what? Right? Or we try another person at that company. Whatever it is, got to be mapped clearly.
Yeah. And here's your quick little checklist for this element. So what templates and scripts can you create that make the handoff process more frictionless and standardized? What information needs to be filled into the CRM by the SDR to prepare the AE to not ask any of those same questions?
Yes.
How and why are opportunities accepted or rejected? And how is this feedback given on opportunity quality so that you can continue to incrementally improve? And then what happens after an opportunity is qualified to ensure that it makes it all the way through the pipeline?
Yeah.
And that's it. That's the whole playbook. That is the whole second half of the new sales development methodology. Yeah.
So easy. Nothing to do here. It's so easy.
It's so cool to see it laid out this way. It started with just an ugly, awful sheet of like 143 of the things that you need to do with like different weightings. And it was like the formula, and it's come such a long way. It's just cool to be on the last live stream here with the methodology out and making sense to everybody. So we hope I hope this has helped add some clarity, maybe illustrate sort of where you're at on the path and what you can do to give you the tools to figure out, okay, if I'm not seeing the results that I was expecting, here's where to look.
Yes.
Totally. And yeah, check out the sales development methodology. It has been published. There's going to be a whole bunch more open source material that is coming out on the topics. We'll dive deep into all those things. And please, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button if you're watching us on YouTube, because you'll be notified when we do the live streams, the podcasts, or our virtual events, all that kind of stuff, so that you can keep up to date on, all the wonderful guests that we have join us, like Alice, and then all of the wonderful people that we have internally, like Carrie and Colin. But thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure having you all.
Thanks for hosting,
Yeah,
Sarah.
it was a pleasure. Great topic.
Great to see you all again, chat. We'll see you soon.